Guys, thank you so much for coming to this podcast. I really appreciate it. You guys trusting us to have this conversation means a lot. Now, today's podcast, we can talk about a lot of different things, but with the political climate being what it is and us being on the precipice of the election, I know a lot of us have a lot of feelings that we want to discuss. So today's podcast will be about politics, polarization, and how do we build a better tomorrow through peace. And so I want you guys to take time just to introduce yourselves to the audience and let them know a little bit about you. If you can give your name, your major, and then your political affiliation, but not just like Democrat or Republican, but like your why. Why do you identify as a Democrat or a Republican? So start.
Hi, my name is Jacob Bandock. I'm from Columbus, Mississippi, and I'm in a social work graduate program. And my philosophy boils down to the fact that I come from a long line of people that made America great, people working on trucks, working on the railroad, dairy farmers in Wisconsin. And in 60 years, I don't want people my age now to have the same problems that I'm experiencing. So just
and that
better
puts you in
tomorrow.
what camp?
Left, very far to the left.
Very far to the left.
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. All right.
First of all, thank you so much for having us.
Thank
I'm
you.
so excited.
Thank you, Jensen.
My name is Jensen Ware. I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm a junior here at Ole Miss majoring in public policy leadership, and I affiliate as a conservative Republican. I think a lot of my values stem from my faith, so I'm a follower of Jesus, and I've grown up in a Christian household my whole life. Both of my parents were conservatives, and so they instilled those values within me at a very young age, but I've been interested in politics for a super long time too, so I was able to kind of branch out, think for myself, and truly establish those beliefs for myself through research, discussions with people, and my own real life experiences, like interning on Capitol Hill this summer. That was a huge part of shaping my beliefs as well and making me who I am today as a conservative Republican.
Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
When I was at Ole Miss, I also majored in Trent Law, at public policy.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I love it.
It was very informative. So
Yes.
thank you. And then, sir?
My name is William Pentecost. I'm a junior at Ole Miss, majoring in public policy leadership and rhetoric. I'm also conservative Republican. And my story is very similar to Jensen on how I got to that. I was raised in a Christian household by two conservative parents. However, they're not extremely political. They try to stay out of that because they got three other kids. But I've always kind of had a knack for politics, and kind of similar to Jensen, I've had the opportunity to work in various sectors, all Republican, ranging from state Mississippi all the way up to DC. And through that, it's allowed me to kind of research issues and learn a lot more about Republican values. And it's ultimately kind of why I'm a Republican today.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Appreciate that.
Hi, my name is Mary Catherine Archer. I'm a junior from Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I, like these two, am a Christian, and a lot of those beliefs form how that's actualized in policy. So socially, I think I kind of tend to go a little bit more conservative, but also in my placement as a woman, as a Black woman, there are a lot of things that I've experienced that kind of form my views for policy as a whole. And so I think that when it comes to making decisions generally, or making decisions for our nation as a whole, I think that I have a heart for people who aren't in the best situation, who aren't placed in this world at a position in our society where things and institutions are formed for their benefit and formed for them to reach the most actualized version of themselves. So I do tend to skew a little bit Democrat, but still kind of midline, because I don't so tightly identify with one or the other.
Not many people are bold, and we talked about this before, but to express that, like, I'm thinking independently because my background, my experiences called me to. And so you're, like you said, you identify maybe more left, but a moderate left who thinks independently. And when you feel biblically convicted through your faith, you lean right. And I think, honestly, you're more indicative of a lot of Americans and a lot of people where they can really identify with that and say, yeah, my faith is my ultimate, or this particular ideology is my ultimate, and it therefore skews the way in which I see things. They're not as binary as people want them to be. So thank you for sharing that, guys. Thank y'all. We good?
Yes.
I know it's kind of awkward, but we're going to keep breathing and getting through this. But you guys are doing wonderful. And that's what I mean by just like sharing where you are, feeling very natural. You guys are doing wonderful all together. So polarization, guys. Today is different than any other day, I feel like, in American history. Just the social climate feels very much embittered. It feels like we're angry at each other all the time. If you look through social media, it feels like there's no middle ground, nowhere to have conversations. And so I want to talk a bit about that, if that's okay. And the conversation around polarization, as it being such a embittered space, is this, and it's most certainly true of nowhere else in the politics and the political landscape, what do you think is the main driving factors in our society of polarization? Give me one.
Yeah. So for me, I often tell people this. One of the kind of primary driving factors that I think about is just social media. Technology is a great thing; it can be used for good, for like research and just communicating purposes. But also, I've found that particularly things like social media can inhibit kind of the personal relationship aspect. And when you're not having conversations like we're having tonight with people we may not necessarily agree with, when you don't have those conversations, you're not intentional about that. That's where kind of polarization kind of starts. Because if you never have the conversations, one person might be over here, one's over here, and you're never doing anything to kind of solve those issues. And so I think, especially with our generation, we kind of like the first generation that grew up with like the smartphone.
For sure.
And so I think that's kind of a big factor. It's not the only factor, but I definitely think it's a big factor and kind of why polarization is higher today.
Everybody agree with that? Or
yes, I definitely agree with that. I think the keyboard warrior culture is real, and it's just getting worse as we pass on smartphones to younger children and as more generations are online. But I also think a big reason why we're so polarized today is because many people are lacking purpose. And I think religion is on a decline in the United States. And because people aren't turning to faith to be their purpose, they're turning to these movements. And when they find their entire identity in, these more extreme sides of maybe the political aisle, for example, then that's going to be like the only thing that you're about, you know what I mean? So when people's identities are wrapped up in something that is not affiliated with their faith or religious ideology, then there's not as much benevolence to it. And so people are just left purposeless.
Yeah. Oh, these are some very bold and strong words. I love it. Please.
I don't think entirely wrapping yourself into a political ideology or a movement's an entirely bad thing. I mean, you look at the resistance fighters in France, in Nazi Germany. I think we can thank our lucky stars that those people were brave enough to fight back against that fascist regime. And I also think with the religion, I think totally wrapping yourself in that can also be a very dangerous thing. I mean, if you look at throughout history, there have been some horrible, horrible things done in the name of God that maybe even God himself or, whoever would condemn. But so I can definitely agree. And I think that, but I don't think it's because people are becoming less religious. I think a lot of it, like with social media, for sure, you're also having a lot of information that you see online that is just simply not true. There used to be that commercial with, I'm dating a French model, and here comes this guy who is not a French model with State Farm, back in like 2008, 2009. And, not everything you read is true, but that's been lost. What our parents preached to us about not believing stuff on the internet, look what they share on Facebook.
Wow. Wow, that's deep. So, from my understanding, we're going from where you started with more the social media.
More the just technology in general, but specifically
social media. Then we got into the conversation of identity and hopelessness and how that's shaped. And then your point is that those things can be factors, but there are also other extenuating factors that cause the polarization. Sure. And you've also kind of talked about how faith, as good as it is, maybe possibly in its own right, it can be used as a tool of fraction and division. Yeah. Is it anybody else want to speak? And I want you to double back on that and kind of like maybe interact with someone who,
Okay, and I like that y'all brought up the idea of faith because I think there's some polarization still within faith itself. And I think the basis of it a lot of times is that people want to be right and they want to make sure that they're doing life right. And so many of our big political decisions and conversations are about some really important stuff. Like they're about healthcare, it's about border control, it's about all these things that can steer like a good life or a secure life, a healthy life, or insecure life, a life that's not healthy, all these things. So they're important. I think sometimes people's inner drive to be right can kind of block out some of the other information, because it's either be right or accept that I'm wrong. And sometimes accepting that I'm wrong when you've stuck so hard in the things that you think are right can be more damaging than just saying, hey, like maybe there's some room to acquiesce in some places.
And not to interrupt you, but I
ahead.
think sometimes it's not even just people not wanting to admit they're wrong, but this is their entire worldview, and this is how they thought their entire life. So it's scary when you're presented with stuff and it just completely deconstructs everything that you thought was true.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
I love that. You know, you use the word to describe their feelings. I don't feel like that's often done.
Yeah.
That the ability to see that someone can have a worldview that's shaken up in front of them and that they can have a feeling of fear is what you describe it as scary.
100%.
Yeah. Do you feel like that type of language of seeing another person who has a completely different worldview of you, where you completely disagree, but understanding that some of the things that are happening today and some of the polarization and the things that they're being confronted with is scary to your opposing position? From the Democrat, the Republican may be scared. To the Republican, the Democrat may be scared. Like there may be actual fear intertwined in these type of things, not just the identity of being right or wrong. Like it's actually a heartbeat issue as well. Does that kind of come to play?
I mean, for me personally, there might be a little bit of fear, you know, if I'm talking with someone I might disagree with. But at the same time, it's like, I want to see why we disagree. I want to get to the heart of the issue. Kind of like what we're doing tonight here.
Yeah.
We might not all agree necessarily on an issue or something. That's fine. What's important is we have healthy dialogue, healthy conversation, because not only will I be able to see, you know, what they believe and why, but I can also see, maybe kind of reevaluate my own thing, see, maybe they brought up a perspective I never thought about and vice versa. And so while there might be a little fear, whether it's just a topic or just initiating that conversation, I think it is important to have conversations, especially hard conversations, because ultimately I think polarization kind of stems from not having the conversations, as I said earlier. And so I just think, you know, you need to be intentional about it, have those conversations, and it can really go a long way.
Yeah. So he answered from his position, which I appreciate, William. You were saying that, like, for you kind of become, I know you may not think you're being courageous, but honestly, in this landscape, it feels like a very much a triumphant way of looking at it, where regardless of how I feel personally, my fear, my disgust or anger or whatever my emotion is, I'm going to lean in. But so many people pull back, right? And that's just that's the bottom line. More people pull back than lean in, because if more people were willing to lean in, we wouldn't be where we are today. So what are ways that you have seen maybe someone lean in when there has been a true disagreement, and then they're able to build better conversations and relationships? Have you guys ever experienced that, where somebody was totally at each other's throats and yet there was a break where they were able to lean in?
Yeah, I think, and this is why I love public policy leadership at Ole Miss so much, because I'm surrounded by people who want to lean in, who want to understand opposing perspectives, and people who are, you know, like in tune with political spectrums and policy overall. Because I think the average citizen, not to say that it's negative in, you know, its intent or anything, but I don't think the average citizen lives in a space where they're constantly confronted with opposing ideas so much as we are in like PPL. But I think within those classes, we had an ethics class, or I took an ethics class last year, and there were so many times when you're confronted with different views, and it's more so than policy within like this specific ethics class, but it's more morality, so it's more personal, and therefore I think it triggers more conviction, and so there's more emotion that comes up behind it. But I think at the base of leaning in is seeing that other person as a person and seeing them as an equal playing field. And I think this is where faith can kind of imbue a little bit more in it, because as a Christian, in my perspective, everyone is made in the image of God, and therefore every person in themselves is worthy of value, is worthy of respect. It's not something they have to earn, it's something they have. Honor, listening, all these things, value. So seeing people as people and seeing people as image bearers is something that God valued so much to put his image on them, kind of changes the way that I view people, even if they have a view that it's not justified, it's not any of the things that I think them as a person, I think I can value them enough within this worldview to listen and to see and to try to understand. Just like where they're coming from and how they believe those things. And I think they're just seeing people as people and seeing them as equals kind of helps you get through.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I piggyback off something?
Please.
She just gave me a really good thought. That was really great. And another thing I think we so often fall into is just if someone disagrees, it's okay to disagree. But like, if I disagree with you, I see you as like not an equal because we don't agree on something. And I think that also creates a lot of polarization. Like just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean you're not equal. Like she said, at the end of the day, all four of us here go to Ole Miss. We're all students, regardless of political views, regardless where we are on the spectrum, politically speaking. We're all students. I'm a Christian too, so I believe we're all, created in God's image. We can come together over that. And I'll give an example, not political example, that I always think about. I'm a big sports guy. And so, like, one of my best friends goes to Mississippi State. Ole Miss and Mississippi State are huge rivals in football.
Oh, God.
Really heated rivalry, right? I hate Mississippi State football. I don't like them. But he's still my best friend, and I'm going to be like, obviously, I don't like his team, but we're still friends.
Yeah.
We may not agree on what team's better, but we're still friends at the end of the day. And if I judged him strictly based on the team he liked or supported, not only is that fair, but that's stupid, honestly. Yeah. And I think too many people do that.
I like your analogy of a team, because we see that as like, oh, I like football, I like this team, I like that team, but we don't see that as a part of our identity, as so much so that we see different political parties as parts of our identity. Yeah. And it's so crazy, because then it becomes, if we see our political party as part of our identity, me not liking your political stance is me not liking you as a person. And that's extremely dangerous. Because if I don't like you as a person, if I don't see value in you, then I think you're disposable. There's so many things that can come with that. So I think if we can grow to see political parties as a part of who we are, just like Ole Miss is a part of us, and liking the football team is a part of us, then I think we can even more so break into polarization and get to some compromise.
No, you're right, because what you guys are picking up on is, again, that core identity. Who do you think that you are? And if that is being compromised in any way, you will go to the gamut to make sure that it has no problems to be occurred with. But what you talked about, as you say, it not being who you are, like you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're Libertarian, not being who you are, but just a part of your experience and how you show up in the world. Now, I realize that we're having a conversation about polarization, and we're having a conversation about coming together, and yet I know there are some disagreements in different pathways, and I want to give time and pause and space for there are different ideological positions when it comes from a spiritual standpoint in the room. And Jacob, I know you've leaned and kind of shared earlier. How would you identify your own spiritual understanding?
I believe in the power of relationships between human beings. Okay. And I kind of, like I was saying earlier, with social work, people don't need a savior, they need services. And that wasn't a comment about religion. That was just, they don't need someone to save them personally. They have the answer themselves. Yeah. I believe in human beings.
Okay. If I hate to put you in a camp, would that be more humanist?
Yes.
Like, okay.
Kind of what Carl Rogers believes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I was trying to get a better understanding so that you weren't misunderstood.
If Jimmy Rogers' Christianity was the only Christianity I ever met, I'd be a Christian.
Okay. And that is a powerful statement, sir. You're gonna have to go deeper. What about his faith was? As someone who identifies as a humanist now, what about his faith was even appealing at that time?
Well, he lives it, and all the positive values associated with it. You grow up in Mississippi. You grow up, especially if you're not dating girls, you'll see a side of religion that a lot of people maybe never see. So, and that's not so about salvation, more about destruction, right? So, yeah, Jimmy Carter wasn't about that. He's about building houses. He's about building people up, not destruction. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, because I do think, to your point, we've been talking more highbrow and less about like the practicalities of real people struggling with real issues and being in real time and space. And one of it would be whether it be racial, whether it be economic, whether it be gender. Those issues do come into play when we talk about polarization.
And one thing I wanted to add about with polarization is it being a part of someone is definitely, I think, if we're having a disagreement maybe on tax code or something like that, that's just a part of your ideology, your worldview. But I think a lot of the times with polarization, it's not just, I'm not against you because you're a Republican, right? Mm-hmm. You're not against me because maybe I vote Democrat. But it's our value systems. What do we really cherish in life? Because when you go to vote, I'll tell you what your values are. That's a powerful statement, what you really value. And there are fundamental disagreements about what is right, what is wrong, and I think we can come together and sit at the same table and break bread and everything. But there are some things there are some things that you just can't see eye to eye on.
Yeah,
So
that's true. And do you think that those things you can't see eye to eye on, is that just called integrity? Just keeping the integrity of your values, or is it more than that or less than that?
1,000 different answers for every situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
For
think
sure.
it's one or the other, but I do think it's interesting to see where do you draw the line, right? Please.
Oh, I was just breathing. Sorry, I didn't have anything to add.
I
Sorry.
think that's a name for the room. I think we all need to breathe for a second.
Sorry.
No, I appreciate it. I think that was intuitive. So I appreciate that. But like picking up on what you're saying, I do think that there are real issues, like not just like the moniker of Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, but there are deeper issues that are there that are core, and that at the end of the day, that there's no reconciling those particular issues at hand. And so I think there's one thing about talking about the issues, and there's nothing about talking about the person. And I think where we are in polarization today, we've conflated the two.
Okay.
And so now the person is the issue, and that's just it. And it's like, how do we weave them apart so that I can see that we will never agree on this issue, but man, I can see that you are human. And I can see, as you said earlier, you are scared. Like, that's a human, emotion and experience. And I just think that's where we're not, to be honest. But you guys have been great. I'm going to ask one more question that may be a little divisive, but someone, we brought it up at the table earlier, and I just want to kind of talk about it here, which is that when you think about the political parties, and we are in this bifurcated system, even though there's third parties, but let's be honest. When you think about the bifurcation of the political system, do you think there is one party more or less at fault for the current polarization? I didn't say for the state of America or the world. I'm talking specifically about polarization. Do you think there's a party? It could be in your own, right? When you do your individual interviews, I want to talk about how you see your own party having issues. But can you see, is one party more, less, or same at fault for polarization? And I'll follow that up with, and you can add to your question, is there anything outside of the Democrat or Republican? Is there an institution or an entity that benefits from that polarization that's at hand? I know you guys are dreaming for this question, so I'm just going to pick.
One of y'all has to open this one up.
I can know. Or do you want to go?
Oh, no, you haven't told much.
Okay. I'll be the sacrificial lamb. I would say, if I had to choose one group of people who is mostly responsible for the polarization in America, I would say it would be the media. And the media skews leftist Democrat. Obviously, as I announced, I affiliate as Republican, so I'm sure that comes to no one's surprise that would be my answer. And I say that acknowledging that there's totally problems within Republican and conservative media as well. I just think that has been a huge, huge issue. And I think, the argument that Donald Trump has come in and really been divisive, I acknowledge the truths of that argument. But I also think that Donald Trump was honestly a middle finger to the mistreatment and divisiveness that was occurring decades earlier, coming mainly from, again, mainstream media that skews Democrat and to the left. So that's my thoughts on that.
So to clarify, in response to the Trump rise to power, he's tapping on something that was already there.
Yes. And I think he totally has been a divisive figure, but I think there was a lot of divisiveness that was already occurring. And so it was like throwing gasoline on a fire that had already been burning for some time.
Okay.
And when the media gave him nonstop free airtime in 2016 and basically got him to the White House, they certainly were pouring gasoline on that fire that Trump was spewing. So I'm with you 100%.
It's interesting how y'all agree and disagree with media. You may say they screw left. You just said they screw right or go right. But it's so interesting that like both of you are saying it's media.
Yes.
Like, regardless at the end of the day, however you may see that leaning, there's something about the fourth, as I call it, the fourth wall, the fourth institution. There's something about that institution that it seems like there's a bit of corruption in of itself. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the media has played a large role. I mean, on really both sides. I think they've I mean, the media is never perfect, of course, but I don't, like in this current election, for example, I don't think Kamala Harris or Donald Trump neither one of them have been portrayed how they actually are. I think that's true. And I think also, kind of when I spoke about earlier being social media, a lot of people, especially our age, get a lot of their news from things like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, and all those things have different formulas to where like they're gonna present what you want to see. So you're only getting one side anyway.
Yeah.
And if you're always going to accept that as true without doing your own kind of research, not only are you going to be misinformed, but those companies are profiting off of that. So to your question about who's benefiting, I think these large kind of media companies, they're making money off of that. And I think I know there's third parties like you said, but I think both the Republican and the Democrat Party not only are kind of split right now, but they've always been split. Like in other words, within both parties, you're going to have extremists, on one side, like on the Democrats, you might have like an AOC or someone, and then on the Republicans, you might have like a Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're very out there, more so than moderate. And they've always been, I mean, you can go all the way back to America's founding. There's always going to be people that are on one far side or the other. That's just how it is. But the one thing that has changed has been the media, particularly with the rise of technology and all this stuff. They're profiting off of misinformation on both sides, and I think that's really a big contributing factor to the increased polarization.
I agree with you 100%. I just want to add too that traditional media sources are doing this. That sadly have done the same thing for hundreds of years. That TikTok and Facebook with all these algorithms and everything, especially TikTok. I mean, it's downright, even outside of politics, it's just how individualized it is.
Yeah.
A little concerning.
Can I ask a question? Like, as someone who's a little older, like, if it's so true, and we just know that social media is doing that, like, I don't understand, like, where is the revolt from that? Like, how do you cease and stop this tool, this mechanism that is causing so much polarization? If you know it's like one of the key factors that's causing it. And that might be a question that you guys have the answer to, but I just wonder, was there any solution toward it?
Well, you probably have to start by regulating these companies, and I think that I know right now in America it's pretty popular to say break up big tech. So maybe I don't know if all four of us can agree to that, but I think that might be something. Maybe we can start with that. We can start trying to, because I mean they're never going to change it as long as they're making all this money. As long as they have 3 or 4 houses, come on, ethics? Who cares? Dollar bills.
But I think what you were referring to was like kind of a bottom-up revolt instead of like top-down change in your question. I think it would just go back to what we were talking about earlier about purpose and people attaching themselves to different movements, which is much easier through modes like social media. But also, I think it also brings up a different conversation, and that conversation would be addiction. I think it is a very, very addictive thing that has just really spread across the entire world. Young children, teenagers, all the way up to older people are experiencing the dopamine releases that are equivalent to drug usage. So how do we counteract that? And when it's not just like, memes, it's like actual divisive information that's being put out on these websites or these apps. It's just the consequences are much greater.
I definitely agree. What you guys all are saying has been incredibly informative and interesting. Like, I mean, the way people talk about Generation Z, I'm gonna be honest, it makes you guys seem like you're not as informed as you are. And so to hear you give so much wisdom and information, all of you are so balanced. I mean, you have a identifying Democrat, a Republican, and a Democrat, and you're sitting here having what could be more than a difficult conversation, and you're willing to hear each other. And I just want to, pause and stop before we transition into the conversation about peace building. I just want to let you know that you're actually doing it in real time. I don't know if you feel that, but you are. So again, thank you for.
Good job, guys.
I feel like we need to shake hands.
I'm just like,
because I don't think you guys get that props enough. A lot of people, when they paint your generation, it's like they're divisive, they're tearing things down, they're protesting everywhere. It's like, what's going to happen with the next generation? I'm like, well, they're here, and I feel like you guys have showed up well. So again, thank you for that. So you said earlier about, maybe one thing we can all agree upon, because we may disagree fundamentally about a lot of things, but you said that there could be agreements. You used that phrase earlier. And so I want to talk about that. If when you think about going from polarization to peace, if that's even possible, first of all, that's the question. And then how would you define that peace if you think it would be possible?
Well, not to be a contrarian, but
Yeah.
the thing with peace is peace for who? I'm a kind of a conflict-based guy, right? And there are certain the way the current system is set up is there are people who do very well, but it is at the expense of other people having extremely horrendous, violent lives. Of course, we don't want to say that about someone's life, but compared to how the other people are living off of their labor, that's 100% what it is. So I think we can have peace right now. We can completely disagree on a worldview, on a religion, whatever, and still sit on the same couch. But I think if we're going to have peace, we got to what is that? What does that look like? Because one man's peace is another person's prison.
Yeah. So how do you define it? With that background and understood, could you define it?
An individual having complete unfettered autonomy, and whatever options they want to pursue, they have an option to pursue it without any sort of resistance. I guess something like that.
I actually really respect and I believe that. So the autonomous nature of human being, that dignity, and without the obstacles of flourishing, being able to flourish without obstacle, that is peace.
Yes,
I like that. Okay, sorry. Anybody else? How would you define peace? Do you think it's possible?
I would actually disagree with that definition.
Okay, let's go.
I don't think peace is the absence of conflict or obstacles. I think it's the flourishing as a result or in the presence of those obstacles. And I think we are seeing that slowly play out in our world, but we still have a long way to go. And I agree partially with what you said, one man's peace may be another man's prison. However, I think there's a level of cynicism and skepticism that will just not be helpful when we're trying to actually pursue peace and make that the top priority. So it's we can all accept the world will never be perfect. I think that's just a baseline fact. However, how are we rising above that? What are we doing to combat that basic fact? How are we just living out day-to-day, or our day-to-day lives in a way where we're uplifting others and trying to make lives for ourselves, trying to pull others up despite the obstacles and the conflicts that will never go away.
Okay, I think that's really a acute understanding and feedback, but I want to give you and Jensen a time to kind of just go and have a conversation about what you're saying, and then I would love for you guys to add in again the conversations about what is peace and can it be achieved, and so I would love for you to respond.
I just want to say what you started out with it's kind of like one of the fundamental principles in recovery is coming from going through a really hard experience, negative experience, and being stronger because of it. That's kind of what we're doing here with a recovery from polarization, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
But
okay.
Yeah.
I love that. Recovery from polarization.
Yeah.
That is,
that's what it feels like. It could be the title.
Maybe. Come
on, there we go.
Come on, let's go. I love that.
I can definitely agree with that definition, especially if you go through, to achieve peace, there has to be some sort of conflict, right? There has to be some sort of difficulty. So, yeah.
Awesome.
I appreciate that because.
Sorry, I was just going to say, especially through a social lens, applying to stuff like this. To achieve peace, you look like the civil rights movement. Well, for someone like James Eastland, that wasn't very peaceful. But for someone like, Fannie Lou Hamer, maybe, who was working on that plantation, it was probably I wouldn't say it was peaceful, but that by that definition of peace, that's what she was trying to achieve. So, yeah.
Yeah, I see. I'm just really happy because you started off with a particular definition. You disagree with that definition, but as you expanded upon your point, he then came back and was like, "Oh, well, for sure, I didn't mean it in an anemic way.
Right.
I meant it in a robust way." And you guys both, but you came at different points.
Right.
You're sitting really close by the couch, so praise God. But just it worked out. But just I do think it worked out because you heard each other. You listened, and I think that ability to listen, and then you were like, "Oh, well, I can even give you an example in history why you're right." So I appreciate you just doing that in real time, and again, both of you kept the integrity of your positions.
Yeah, and there's this idea in social work of meeting the client where they're at, not that you're a client.
Oh, yeah.
Not yet, anyway, right? And who knows? But and just acknowledging that what they're saying is true. They what the client says is objective fact. right? So yeah,
Subjective fact?
no, objective.
Affective fact. Okay.
I know it's kind of weird because
Okay.
in any other field it would be subjective fact. But
Okay.
they consider, it's weird. It's weird.
Okay, praise God. All right, I'm going to ask you guys to jump in on that question. You don't have to give an answer, but I would love to know what you guys think of how would you define peace and
I was just thinking about kind of what they were saying. I think it's really difficult for us to say peace, like have one idea of peace. And I think in our policy and social work, policy altogether, because social work kind of feeds into policy in a lot of ways. I think we're very top down. So I think it's really hard for us to go from the top and say, okay, you do this for peace, you do this for peace, you do this for peace. And I think it would be easier to have a bottom up approach to peace, because I think peace is going to actualize differently for every person. I think in my, again, worldview as a Christian, faith in Jesus and working that out is a really big part of peace. But I think an important factor to salvation, especially leading people to salvation through Jesus, is dealing with the needs that they have. It's really difficult to talk to somebody about the Bible when they're hungry. It's really difficult to talk to somebody about the Bible when they are, afraid of different protective entities in their community. And those things are a factor that's hitting them every single day. So while I do believe that Jesus is the peace, is the way that we achieve peace overall, and that peace probably won't come until the end,
Amen.
I think that there's personal needs and necessities that we need each day, and I think it's hard to set a policy over that. I think I really want to, because it's easy and it fits into exactly what my kind of niche is in this world. But I think it's going to be difficult. And I think I agree with Jensen's view of peace in that it prevails within difficulty. And I agree with yours as well in that it's going to be different for each and every person, that one's view of peace is going to be a prison for another person's. But I think that it's much, much, much more individualized. And I think that one can have a peace in absence of turmoil, while another one needs to prevail through that. Not needs to, but will have to, just in practical sense. But I think just overall, it's difficult for us to say a blanket peace. I think it's difficult for us to say a blanket anything.
Yeah. And so your definition with that, because I love the background because it helps to inform a definition. Your definition just in one sentence would be?
I think my definition of peace is promoting and pursuing Jesus, but actualizing that in practical ways that help people, even if they're not particularly of Christian identification yet. I think the Christian worldview works good for everyone, whether they subscribe to the faith or not. I think our working that out gives us to a more peaceful world.
Okay. Well, you seem like you having a time over there. Tell me something, brother.
Yeah. All right. So kind of like she said, it's kind of hard. Peace is can mean a lot of different things. Think about like peace as in not having wars, or peace being like, we might disagree, but let's not fight each other kind of thing. So just hearing all three of them talk, actually I thought of 3 words, all begin with C. It's calm, collective composure.
Okay.
So I'm not saying it's necessarily my definition, but I'm saying in this sense, I think those are 3 kind of synonyms that I would use to relate to peace. Then kind of echoing off what they both said, I think peace in one sense, of course it varies by person, like you said. And as such, I think, people may achieve peace different ways. They have different obstacles to overcome. But I also think another way peace can be looked at is, let's say you're having an argument with someone, like maybe over something political. I think peace could also be agreeing to disagree. Meaning that, at the end of the day, we might not agree on something, but peace is created because we're just going to accept we may not agree, but like we said earlier, I still value that person for who they are, not just because they might not agree with me on something politically. I think one way, I don't think perfect peace will ever be attained in this sense, but I think a way to definitely serve as a catalyst to achieving some sort of peace is having conversations like this. I think it gives us the opportunity to hear how each other thinks, hear each other's ideas, and I think it's a really good way to start the conversation. And sometimes it can be hard, but it's been good so far. So
I love how you came with that preacher sermon, that William Pentecost, baby.
No.
He said calm,
Not the
collective,
Rev.
and composure.
Yes,
Yeah.
3 C's.
Come on, 3 C's.
CCC.
He done gave a sermon in this room. All right, praise God.
The Rev.
But okay, so we kind of understood the peace from a broad sense. As we wrap it up in understanding the peace building aspect, just be frank. I mean, you know the election is coming, and you know that we're in a space where we're kind of all maybe anxious a bit, maybe anxious about what will happen within our families, what may happen in our school, what may happen for the greater America or the world. And so when you look at that space, what comes to mind? Does peace ever come to mind? Do you have a space where you feel like you put that type of anxiety, or do you feel somewhat crippled or upset about what's coming down the pipeline?
I think there's a general consensus that no matter what happens, it's going to get worse. I haven't met anyone that says, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to after the election." I haven't heard that yet.
Yeah.
So
I am.
well,
I'm looking
okay.
forward to it.
I can't say that anymore.
You can't
Yeah.
Looking forward to it is just being on the other side of the anxiety of
Yes.
it.
So-
That's where I'm coming from when I say that. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No more
So
commercials, no more
Yes.
text messages, no
Yes.
more emails, no more.
Yeah,
Oh my
I've
goodness.
seen that.
No more
Yes.
Gracious.
Yes.
Oh, that makes sense. Is there a way, maybe after this, we get through this, is there a way that we can maybe lessen the deepening divides in America? I don't care if it's Kamala, I don't care if it's Trump, but if in any space, if there is a definitive president moving forward, do you think that there would be a way? And if so, what ways, particularly as college students, do you think that you could build peace or does lessen divide of polarization?
Well, maybe I'm optimistic, but I think after this election cycle, things will get better. That might be a crazy hot take, but I think it will get better. And I want to use the debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz as an example. They agreed like so much, and I was like, "Is this a debate?" So I would just point to that as an example. I think we will begin to promote politicians that are very different than the ones that we've had in the past decade. And in terms of our generation, I think we are so desperately craving something outside of what we've experienced for the past several years. I think we are a lot more tolerant than previous generations. I think we're very informed, like you said, and opinionated. I don't mean tolerant as like a wishy-washy term, you know what I mean? But I think we have lived the mess that was kind of created before our time, and we want to see change. And so I really think that it is in our hands. And I think we will begin to see change slowly but surely as we come of age and begin filling in these spaces, but also as we promote others into those spaces as well.
Jensen, I truly believe you. Like, I believe that to be true. Like, honestly, as someone who created an organization, it's because I believe that you guys are capable of that. So could you give me one practical, before I go next, could you give me one practical way that you could think that your generation would do so? You may have already given it when you said putting the right political candidates in, because you're of voting age now. So that's a practical. Is there any other practicals?
Ooh, good question. I think we are just a lot more open inherently. And so I think a lot of us have tended to have conversations with people on the other side. Maybe we aren't as susceptible to that as a result of certain obstacles like social media and experiencing the polarization that we talked about earlier. However, I would just say exposure. Like, I think exposure is a two-edged sword. In one sense, like, we're getting this constant bombardment of information that can really weigh us down and bring darkness. With mental health and, physical health and, like, again, polarization, as we've spoken about. However, exposure helps us to see the other side and to not just be in an echo chamber of the information that we prefer. I went to a very diverse high school and middle school. It was a K through 12 school. And so from just a young age, I was friends with Muslims, Hindus, people of backgrounds that, like, I I would have never been exposed to if I wasn't in those spaces. So I think exposure is a huge part of it. And so again, social media is good for that reason and also bad for other reasons.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
exactly.
Thank you for that. I really
Of course.
appreciate that answer. That was strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I agree with Jensen in a lot of spaces. I think that after the election, I think immediately after, we'll relax.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see, we have to go back to work after this. We have to go to class. There's something we have to do. I was just having a conversation with a friend recently, and they were so emotionally heightened about this whole thing. And I was like, you realize you have a test like the day after this, right? Like there's other things that have to happen immediately after this. And so I think we'll get to those things, but I think in the long run, I think before this election, in this time specifically, we've gotten so just like worried about it that it's almost as if the opposing opponent wins, then the world is going to end that day. Like it's going to completely shut down. Everything's going to fall. Yeah. And so I think when we wake up the next morning and see things are still turning, you know, crossing our fingers, I think we'll decide that like life has to go on after that. Yeah. And so then I think our generation, I think we're really empowered in a lot of ways. I think we're empowered by the amount of information we have access to and how quickly we can get to that. And I think in that, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're receiving the right information and arming ourselves with the things we need to make informed decisions on politics or just in life in general. And not that we're just following the specific ideologies and parties and the places they lead us to. But I think also it's our responsibility to just to go forward and not to stick right here. I just think we have to keep moving. I think this was a whole thing after President Trump won the first time and after Obama won in those two elections. People were like, okay, so what are you going to do now? It's like, I'm going to go to school. Like there's things that I have to do after this. I'm going to go to work. I have to live. And so I think afterwards we just have to continue on and we have to reckon with whatever things happen. And then, sorry to go back to this again, but I think in this worldview, there is an expected end that we're getting to. And I think that the things that we experience here are very, very important, and the things that we experience in politics here are very, very important. But for me specifically, it's not my end. And it's not whoever sits in the presidential seat, it's not the complete control of what's going on here. I do believe that there's something greater, something bigger that's really in control. And so I think that he will use whoever is in that space to get to his end. And I have a lot of hope in that end. So,
Amen. Yeah, these sermons, I'm loving it. Okay, you guys are going to wrap us up if that's okay. I would love to hear your response.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
I actually forgot it. So no, because I got sucked into their world.
You're good. All right, so I've got a few things. I'm just going to be echoing what they both said. Of course, earlier I made it known, I'm a Republican. I'll be voting for Donald Trump in however long the election is, 12 days or whatever from right now at filming. But kind of like she said, regardless of what happens in the election, the world's going to go on. The notion that America's just going to crumble and fall to nothing the next day that's just not true for many reasons. I mean, for one, the country's run by a lot more people than just the president. You've got Congress, you've got all this other stuff. So people need to calm down. There's other stuff going on. But also, kind of like she said, they said the same, Republicans said the same thing when Obama won in 12, Democrats said the same thing when Trump won in 16, Republicans said the same thing when Biden won in 20, and now it's just like, this is nothing new, and we're all still here, so I guess they were wrong, And also, kind of like what Jensen said, the vice president debate was proof that there is a future for both parties. Trump is about to be, if not, he's already 80. If he wins this time, he can't run again. He's already been president twice. He can't be president again. Kamala, she's younger, but I'll be honest, I don't think, if she was just I don't think she'll be the nominee next time. I don't. And so I think this election, both of these candidates, they won't appear again. There's other people. On the Democrats, you have people like Gavin Newsom in California. You have, these big names on the Republican side. I mean, I've heard all sorts of people. I've heard, of course, J.D. Vance. I've heard Glenn Youngkin in Virginia is a name to watch. There's all these people. And a lot of people always ask, what's the future of the Republican Party after Trump? well, I mean, there was a Republican Party before Trump. There's going to be one after Trump.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just like there was Reagan Republicans in the 80s, there's Trump Republicans now. It's nothing new. And kind of just, I mean, I'll bring religion into it too. Being a Christian, I'm like, regardless of the election, the outcome of the election, you know, God's got a plan. You know, I'm still going to go to school the next morning, I think, unless I get sick. You know, I'll be in class at whatever time I have class on Wednesdays, 1 p.m. Yeah, I'll be in class. You know, life will go on. Obviously, I hope Trump wins, but if not, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I think people need to get their mind around that. Like, things might not always go your way, but life goes on.
Can I pull back into something he just said too, talking about Trump Republicans and Reagan Republicans? I think a lot of our issue in that a big barrier to peacemaking is that we have so tightly associated the party with the person to where it's not, oh, I don't want the Republican Party to win. I don't want Trump to win. I don't want, you know, Democrat ideas. I don't want Kamala there. It's just so tightly associated with the person that I think one of the big fears and reasons why we feel like the world is going to end if that person doesn't win is because we're wrapped up in the person. Okay. And I think if we were more focused on individual ideas, we will see, as we've already seen here, how closely and how much more connected those ideas actually are, and how our purposes and our perceived end result and how our you know, intended end result is so more closely aligned than we think they are. And so I think that's another basis to peacemaking, is breaking away from personal associations and getting into what the actual like policies and ideas are, and then moving from there and seeing like how close we really are with people who appear to be opposed.
I'll say something too, kind of, she's made me think of something. You know, like how sometimes people get wrapped up into who the person is versus like the ideological values or whatever. So I know we said earlier, kind of talking about how we may not agree, and then we sometimes therefore view that person as a lesser. I think I've talked to people personally, like Republicans, it's actually flipped when they're talking about Trump. They're like, oh, I agree with what he says on this issue, but goodness, Trump just doesn't shut his mouth ever. I don't like him as a guy, but I agree with like 90% of what he's doing, but I can't vote for him because, I mean, he's a hothead. I mean, he is, you know, and I think that's 100% true. I mean, I don't like Trump necessarily as a person per se. I mean, I'm never going to agree with someone 100%, and just ever. And if I do, I'll be suspect of that, honestly. But, you know, and I've told several people, I'm like, look, you know, if he has the same beliefs as you do, and you're just solely stuck on who he is, maybe as a person, because like, maybe he's a lot on Twitter, he says all sorts of like rambles, this, that, you know, then that could be a whole other issue too. And I think that's a side that sometimes people don't look at. You know, like we said earlier, you might not like someone because you disagree. But in this sense, I've also seen people, they agree with him, but they don't like him because of the way he portrays himself on something like Twitter. So it's just something else.
The difference of the actual underlying party, the way in which it works, the values, the systems, and it could or could not be tied.
And I will say too, back to her point, a lot of those people I've met have been, you know, they are kind of older, like Reagan Republicans. You know, they're like, oh, it's changed so much. But I'm like, well, I understand he may have been a great president, but Ronald Reagan's not our president anymore. You know, like you're still a Republican at the end of the day. Or are you? You know.
And I know you're going to take us home, so I'm going to give you the floor to wrap us up. So please share your wisdom.
Okay, I just want to say about like with Election Day wrapping up, there was a great group of Americans called the Grateful Dead who were certainly polarizing, and they said, see how everything lead up to this day, and it's just like any other day that's ever been, right? A lot of the work I do is around like registering people to vote and election information, so I'm hoping my supervisor will have the lazy boy for me after Election Day, but we'll see about that. But also with people just having these kind of cults of personalities around certain candidates, or just being, you know, with Reagan, it was, I mean, with Trump, holy cow. I mean, but you see it to a lesser extent too on the Democratic side, I think. You know, you're not allowed to criticize certain people. But, you know, it's un-American. It is really, really just fundamentally, in my opinion, un-American to sit here and have a fascination with a particular candidate and put them on a pedestal. You know, I saw a book, it had a picture of the cross and it had a red tie over it, and it was comparing Donald Trump to Jesus Christ and the story of Donald Trump to Jesus Christ. That's ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. But it is just un-American to have some sort of, that's not what we're about. I mean, we have a real long conversation about who we are, but I think we can all agree that this country is not about some person in a suit and we sit there and place them up on the pedestal and say, "Oh, guide us."
Yeah.
The
just
golden calf. Look what happened to.
Hey, Israel.
Yeah.
But question, and you mean that for both parties?
Oh yeah.
The way you said that, I felt that you meant that for both parties. The idealization of any person is going to be a downfall, and is completely un-American.
I think the Democrats, you see it a little bit less because I think there's more willingness to break away because a lot of Democrats aren't really Democrats.
Yeah.
They just vote Democrat because of what the other major option is. And I think on the Republican side, you see maybe a little bit more of it just because I think people have similar values on the Republican side, more conservative, traditional values, where on the Democratic side, there's not a lot of
consensus.
Yeah. But it's definitely on the Democratic side. Go tell people that you don't like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris because of their stances on something. And I've worked on Democratic campaigns every year.
And you see that.
Oh, yeah. It's weird. It's just
the
weird.
Golden calf, let me protect their image.
It's like, come on.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want to say thank you.
Thank you
you didn't
so
have to
much.
come to have this conversation. You didn't even really know each other beforehand, and you said we're complete strangers. That you knew would have a different background than you. You would knew to have different political stances than you, and you were willing to have a real conversation about politics, polarization, in a very intense time. And so you giving me that trust to honor you this time well, honor you and your stories well, means a lot. But also the way you honored each other, I think, means a lot. And I do think you're serving as a model of how you can have real disagreements. Fundamentally, nobody's mind is fundamentally changed in here, and yet no one is dead either. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So again, I thank you guys all for being a part of this, and just thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having
Do
us.
we all high toddy?
You all hotty
Hotty-toddy.
toddy.
High toddy?